Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about segments in the coordinate plane. Remember that's where we have an x and y axis, and we're going to talk about how to find the distance between 2 points, also the length of a segment, and then how to find the midpoint of the segment. So we're going to be looking for coordinates here. So if we want to find the distance between 2 points, in a couple ways you're going to be asked that is first of all to just find the distance. Another way you're going to be asked that is to find the length of a segment. Both of them are telling you to find the same thing. How far apart are these 2 points that create this segment? So we're going to just use the Pythagorean theorem for that. Right triangles are going to pop up a lot in geometry, and they're very helpful, and it's very helpful to know this theorem, this formula, backwards and forwards. So we're going to be given 2 points that both have x's and y's, and we're going to use those to plug in to the Pythagorean theorem. And the best way to show this is by doing an example, so we're going to do just that. So it's important to have graph paper, and if you don't, you can just do the best you can. But I just want to show you this on a graph first. I know this is a little bit small, but I'm going to put 0.67 on here. I'm going to put 4.3 on here. We're looking for the length. Remember, this means the length of segment AB. We're looking for the length of that segment. So we can end up drawing a right triangle. Just like that. And now what we have is that our segment that we're looking for the length, that's the hypotenuse of the right triangle. So I'm going to write my a squared plus b squared equals c squared over here. C is the value we're looking for, just C. C is always the hypotenuse, that's what we're looking for, which is the length of our segment. We find A and B simply by subtracting the x's, so we can get this length we can get A by subtracting the x values, and we can get B by subtracting the y values. So let's do that. We have x values of 6 and 4. So for A, I'm going to plug in 6 minus 4. Don't forget your squared. For B, I'm going to use my y values, 7 and 3. So I'll do 7 minus 3. Don't forget the squared. And now I can just solve this thing for C. So 6 minus 4 gives us 2. Still squared. 7 minus 3 gives us 4. 2 squared is 4. 4 squared is 16. And now the last thing, remember, to get the squared away from the C, we'll take the square root of both sides. The square root and the squared on the C cancel, and we get that C is the square root of 20. And we can leave it like that. That square root can be simplified, and we can talk about that later. Also, sometimes we'll ask for a decimal. We can put that into the calculator and round to the appropriate number. But right now, that's good enough for me. That means that the length of segment AB is the square root of 20 long. So I want you to find the distance between A and B, very similar to what we just did. I want you to subtract the x's to find A, subtract the y's to find B, and then solve for C. So pause the video, try that now. If you're stuck, or when you get to the answer, press play, and I'll go over the answer. So we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem. I always start by writing the Pythagorean theorem. If you write it down every time, you'll never forget it. I'll find the a portion of the theorem by subtracting the x values. They're both 5, so I got 5 minus 5. I'll find b by subtracting the y values, so I have negative 5 minus 3. And then c is what we're looking for. 5 minus 5 gives us 0. Negative 5 minus 3 gives us negative 8. We'll keep going. 0 squared is just 0, so this is gone. Negative 8 squared. A negative number squared is always going to be positive. If you got a negative answer, you might have made a mistake plugging it into your calculator. So negative 8 squared is positive 64. We'll take the square root of both sides to cancel out the squared and get c. And we get that c is equal to the square root of 64, which we know is 8. So that means the distance between point A and point B is 8 units. Another thing we want to find is the midpoint of a segment in the coordinate plane. So the point, remember, that's right in the middle of the two endpoints. And in order to do that, we're going to add the x's together and divide by 2. We'll add the y's together, divide by 2. And notice there's no equal sign in here. M is the name of the midpoint, and we're going to end up with coordinates. So we're going to have an x value and we're going to have a y value. Again, the best way to do this is by practicing. So I have my points A and B. Again, we're going to find the midpoint of segment AB, and if you want to, you can graph it. So I'm going to start with my formula. No equal sign. This is the name of midpoint M. We're going to add the x's, divide by 2, comma. We're going to add the y's, divide by 2. So my x's are 6 and 4. My y's are 7 and 3. And now I can simplify. 6 plus 4 is 10, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. 7 plus 3 is 10, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. So the midpoint of our segment is 5, 5. So let's show that over here. We started with 6, 7, and 4, 3. And we said that the midpoint is 5, 5. And you can see that if we did draw a segment in between there, that 5, 5 would be in the middle. So again, pause here, find the midpoint of segment AB with these new coordinates. So always, always, always start with the formula. It'll help you remember it for a quiz or a test or in the future when you need to know the midpoint. I'm going to add the x's. In this case, they're 14 and 7. I'm going to add these y's, negative 2 and negative 8. And then we're going to simplify. 14 plus 7 gives us 21. Negative 2 plus negative 8 gives us negative 10. (21) divided by 2, that's going to give us a decimal, but it's not a bad decimal. It's 10.5. That's okay. And negative 10 divided by 2 gives us negative 5. Our midpoint is 10.5, negative 5. Notice, I don't have m equals. I don't have just one number. I have parentheses and a comma. This is an actual point on the coordinate plane. We could go graph it like we did in the last one. So when you're finding a midpoint, you should always end up with the answer that's in coordinate form. So we have one more thing for this lesson, and that's how to find the end point of a segment if we're already given one endpoint and the midpoint. And we have a formula down here. We're going to have to use it twice. First, we're going to find an x value, then we're going to find an y value. We're going to take those numbers and write them as a coordinate because we're looking for a point that we can graph, so we need an x and a y in parentheses with a comma. So we're going to take first we'll find the x, we'll take the x value of the midpoint, plug it in here, we'll take the x value of the endpoint that we know, plug it in there, and we'll find the x value of the endpoint we want. So I'm going to shorten this, that's endpoint 2 times the midpoint minus the endpoint given. So first let's find x. The x value of the midpoint over here, m, is 3. The x value of the endpoint that we're given over here is 0. So the x value of our final answer is going to be 6. And I'm going to put that over here. We'll do the same thing for y. So the midpoint y value is -5. The endpoint value is 2. -10 minus 2 gives us -12. So for segment xy, the coordinates for y are 0, 2. The coordinates for the midpoint are 3, -5. And we just figured out that the coordinates for x, the other endpoint, is 6, -12. Pause here. Do the same thing. Find the coordinates of x. So you should have got that the coordinates for x are 2, -2. So the midpoint value for x is 3. Plug that in there. The midpoint value for y is, so the endpoint that we're given is 4. Plug that in there. Get that the x value of point x is 2. Plug in the midpoint value for y, which was -5. The endpoint that you were given, the y value is -8. This minus and a minus makes a plus. You get -10 plus 8 is -2. So the coordinates of our endpoint x are 2, -2. So I've got 2 you-dos. The first one, I want you to find the length of segment AB. And I want you to then find its midpoint. So you should have 2 answers for you-do number 1 and for you-do number 2. I've given you a midpoint, I've given you one of the endpoints, and I want you to find the coordinates of the other endpoint like we just did.